Have you ever felt a chill, a deep, unsettling cold, even when the air around you was still? What if that chill was more than just a draft, but a whisper from a forgotten past reaching out for you? It was a moonless night, the kind where the streetlights cast long, sickly yellow fingers through the window panes of old Arthur Jenkins' house. The street outside was quiet, save for the distant, mournful howl of a dog, a sound that seemed to snake its way right into your bones. Arthur, a man accustomed to the fragmented sleep of old age, found himself particularly restless tonight. An unfamiliar unease gnawed at him, keeping his eyes wide open, fixed on the oppressive darkness of his ceiling. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed from within the house, accompanied by a peculiar coldness that seeped in from nowhere. Arthur frowned, his mind quickly dismissing it. Just the wind, probably a rat scurrying, he thought. Yet, the unsettling sensation persisted, a creeping tendril of dread wrapping around his very soul. He sat up, his aging eyes scanning the room. Everything appeared normal. His wife, Martha, lay beside him, occasionally shifting in her sleep. But a cold sweat slicked Arthur's skin, and his hands trembled uncontrollably. An unexpected buzz startled him. His phone. A new message. He fumbled for it, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Reading the text, he scrambled out of bed, a frantic urgency in his movements. Martha stirred, waking to find her husband hastily dressing, preparing to leave. "Slick Joe just texted," Arthur whispered, his voice hoarse. "Says he needs me to pick up a regular client, fast, out on the highway. Gotta go now or I'll miss them." With that, Arthur was out the door. The roar of his old motorcycle shattered the night's stillness as he sped away. Martha watched him go, a weary shake of her head, then settled back into bed. But as her eyes fluttered closed, a relentless pounding began outside the door. Annoyed, she thought Arthur had forgotten something again, and quickly went to open it. Instead of her husband, Slick Joe Miller stood swaying on her porch, reeking of stale liquor, his face a distorted mask of drunkenness. "Where's Arthur?" he slurred, his words thick and garbled. Martha, exasperated, asked if he hadn't just called Arthur for a ride. Slick Joe's eyes widened, a belligerent scowl twisting his features. "Called him? Me? Nah, you just don't want your man out drinking with me, do you? Don't lie. Did you call him out here or not? Where's Arthur?" he demanded, stumbling forward. Martha, with a sigh, pushed him back out and closed the door. She started to turn back to bed, but then paused. Something about Slick Joe's drunken rambling bothered her. After a moment's thought, she dismissed it. He's always like this when he's been drinking. Just nonsense. Following the address Slick Joe had given him, Arthur found himself at the entrance of Alley 13. He stopped abruptly. The motorcycle's headlights cast a weak yellow beam that was swallowed almost immediately by the alley's oppressive, inky depths. A shiver of dread ran down Arthur's spine, and his entire body trembled. The wrinkles on his face seemed to deepen, contorting into a mask of trepidation. He hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. This was a place where shadows bred, a notorious haven for drifters and outcasts, rife with gambling, drugs, and violent brawls. Its inhabitants were creatures of the night, and outsiders rarely dared to venture in after dark. Whispers of the supernatural clung to Alley 13 like a foul odor. People spoke of hearing children's laughter and cries echoing from its depths in the dead of night, sending chills down anyone's spine. No one knew the truth of these tales, but the alley had long been a forbidden zone, marked not by signs, but by the sheer terror its name invoked. Arthur's thoughts drifted to the mysterious client he was supposed to pick up. A sudden coldness washed over him. Just then, his phone chimed, startling him. It was an unknown number. He answered. A soft, childlike voice spoke from the other end.
"Uncle, please hurry. I'm going to miss my bus back home." Then the line went dead. No hello, no goodbye, just a click. Arthur's fear deepened. A child? Out here? At this hour? Going home alone? And how did he get my number? Did Slick Joe give it to him for convenience? His mind raced, a tangled knot of questions.
The phone buzzed again, urging him. He took a deep breath. He'd made a promise. He'd come all this way. He started his engine. He'd go in, get it done, and leave. With newfound resolve, Arthur drove into the deep alley. The darkness swallowed him whole with every foot he advanced. Following the address, he reached a dilapidated house at the alley's very end. He kept his engine running, too afraid to turn it off, staring transfixed at the darkness within. His wrinkled face contorted, his teeth chattered uncontrollably. A choked gasp escaped his lips, his eyes wide and unseeing as his hands instinctively twisted the handlebars, ready to flee. But then a creaking sound from behind him. He froze. Slowly he turned. The decaying wooden door of the house swung open. The occupant stepped out. It was a young boy, his gaze fixed on Arthur, a strange, knowing smirk playing on his lips, an unnerving, almost demonic twist. A piercing scream tore through the night, shattering the silence. Only the distant, frantic barking of dogs answered. A few windows in the surrounding houses cracked open, curious eyes peeking out, only to slam shut instantly. When dawn broke, a local resident discovered Arthur Jenkins' lifeless body in the abandoned house at the end of the alley. The notorious Alley 13, usually deserted during the day, now buzzed with activity. Arthur's body lay just inside the doorway, his eyes wide open, fixed in a horrifying stare, as if he'd witnessed something unspeakable in his final moments. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some speculated he, a motorcycle taxi driver, had suffered a late-night stroke. Others questioned why he was found dead in an abandoned house that had been empty for over 5 years, its previous owners long gone, and no one dared to buy the land. Those with a more superstitious nature murmured about ghosts, and Arthur's death only fueled their fears. Neighbors sprinkled salt and rice, hanging garlic cloves above their doorways for protection. Alley 13 quieted down after a time, the memory of Arthur's death fading into the background. Until exactly 49 days later, another moonless night descended, the darkness a thick, suffocating shroud over Alley 13. Only the faint, flickering glow of a distant streetlight illuminated the gaunt figure of old Sarah, her hands swiftly collecting discarded bottles and cans, a trade she'd pursued for nearly 5 years. Alley 13 was deserted, as usual, the only sounds the rustle of dry leaves beneath her feet and the frantic scratching of rats rummaging through garbage in the dark corners. As Sarah bent to pick up a beer can near a lamppost, a jarring, prolonged cry of, "Scrap metal! Any scrap metal!" sliced through the air, chilling her to the bone. She looked up, squinting into the gloom. The voice was unfamiliar, not belonging to any of the usual collectors. Annoyance flared within her. Someone's encroaching on my territory, she thought. Grabbing her sack, Sarah hurried deeper into the alley. The cries continued, closer now, then farther, as if intentionally luring her. The alley seemed to stretch endlessly, the darkness growing thicker, swallowing her steps. At first she was angry, but the deeper she went, the more unsettling the feeling became. The voice shifted, echoing from her left, then from directly ahead, disorienting her. Suddenly, the cries ceased. Sarah stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. Before her stood the abandoned house at the alley's end. faintly illuminated by a sliver of moonlight piercing through the clouds.
This house had been vacant for years, yet every time she passed it, she felt a strange, cold breath. She swallowed hard, intending to turn back, but her feet felt rooted to the ground. They moved on their own, pulling her closer to the house. The old wooden door groaned open as she pushed it. Inside, it was pitch black, only faint light from outside revealing old, dust-covered objects. What truly sent shivers down her spine were the incense bowls scattered throughout the room, plumes of thick smoke rising from them, mingling with the heavy scent of mildew. Sarah froze, her eyes darting around, searching for someone, anyone. But there was no reply, only her own ragged, trembling breath. She turned to leave, but the door had slammed shut behind her. Panic surged. She lunged, pulling hard, but it wouldn't budge.
The space around her seemed to shrink, suffocating her. Then sounds began. Whispers, giggles, faint shuffling footsteps echoing from all directions. She screamed for help, but her feeble pleas were swallowed by the house, replaced by mocking, satisfied giggles.
Suddenly, a blast of icy air slammed into her, knocking her to the floor. From the oppressive darkness, 3 small, shadowy figures emerged. They looked down at Sarah, their giggles unnervingly joyful. One of them stepped forward, holding out a crumpled can to her.
"For you, ma'am," one of them whispered, its voice a childlike chime, yet with an unsettling twist at the end of its words. Sarah stammered, I can't," but her trembling hand, against her will, reached out for the can. The child snatched it back.
"But do you remember us, ma'am?" the child asked, staring intently at Sarah. Her whole body shook, her mouth agape, unable to form words. Her eyes remained fixed, unseeing, as tears welled in their wrinkled corners.
The 3 children giggled as the woman writhed on the floor. Suddenly, the children turned and retreated into the depths of the house. Sarah, seizing the moment, desperately tried to crawl toward the door. But as she moved, her hand brushed against one of the incense bowls, sending it crashing to the floor.
The shattering sound made the 3 children stop, their small figures freezing. They turned back to Sarah, their mouths contorted, unleashing heart-wrenching sobs. Their eyes glowed with a terrifying red light, as if about to burst, looking at Sarah as if to devour her whole. Sarah's eyes widened in abject horror.
A blood-curdling shriek echoed through the abandoned house, then silence. All was swallowed by the dark night of Alley 13. The next morning, the residents of Alley 13 once again discovered a lifeless body. It was old Sarah, lying prone on the floor, her body twisted and contorted as if her bones had been broken. And just like Arthur Jenkins, her eyes were wide open, fixed in a horrifying, unseeing stare.
This sent a wave of terror through Alley 13. They pieced together the timings of Arthur and Sarah's deaths and shuddered. Such a grim coincidence couldn't be natural. Rumors about the abandoned house at the alley's end intensified.
Even when authorities concluded both had died of heart failure, people refused to believe it. From that day on, the abandoned house became a forbidden zone. The alley's residents, accustomed to its somber atmosphere, now felt a palpable sense of dread. By day, Alley 13 was empty. By night, it seemed consumed by darkness. The wind whistled through crumbling walls, merging with the elongated howls of dogs, like the wails of lost souls echoing from a dark abyss. The abandoned house was now the epicenter of chilling tales. People whispered of faint lights from the incense bowls flickering nightly within, even though no one dared to enter. Others claimed to hear footsteps and the chilling giggles from inside. The stories spread, weaving a terrifying tapestry of horror.
The sky had turned a sickly gray, the weak light fading as Ethan's car rolled down a deserted road. Trees lining the roadside swayed with each gust of wind, casting flickering shadows across the pavement. Ethan gripped the steering wheel, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. His wife, Sarah, and their young son, Leo, were fast asleep, their faces serene. A small smile touched his lips, a feeling of calm washing over him after a stressful week. Ethan, a young entrepreneur with a successful company, was busy, but he always made time for weekend getaways to their secluded country villa. He'd bought it just a year ago, an older classical style, but perfectly isolated, ensuring no unwanted disturbances. He squinted at the darkening sky. It looked like rain, but they were almost there, so he wasn't worried.
Suddenly, a loud, jarring clang erupted from beneath the car. The vehicle jolted violently, then sputtered and died. Thick, acrid smoke billowed from the hood, filling the air with the smell of burning oil. Ethan quickly pulled over, a knot of worry tightening in his stomach. He just had the car serviced 3 days ago. How could this happen? He popped the hood. Clouds of smoke billowed out, swirling into the cold air. He fumbled, searching, but found nothing amiss. A biting gust of wind swept through, chilling him to the bone.
Ethan continued to inspect the car. Sarah, his wife, had opened the tablet for Leo to keep him entertained. After a while, they both gave up. Ethan's hands were stained black with grease, his face contorted in frustration. He told Sarah he'd call roadside assistance and they'd walk the rest of the way. It was about to rain, and staying wasn't an option. Sarah agreed, but decided to try starting the car one more time. To their surprise, the engine roared to life, filling them with relief.
They reached the villa as darkness fully enveloped the sky. The heavy iron gate groaned open, its hinges protesting, and the gate lights flickered erratically, something they'd never done before. Ethan peered into the villa's interior. The oppressive darkness seemed to drain all life from it, leaving him inexplicably breathless. Only when the lights were finally on and they stepped inside did Ethan exhale. He tried to calm himself. The car trouble had left him feeling strangely uneasy. Sarah checked the time and hurried to the kitchen to prepare dinner. She suddenly regretted not hiring a live-in housekeeper, but she'd wanted the villa to be their private family space. Little Leo scampered around, playing, while Ethan settled onto the sofa, trying to catch up on some work. He focused on reading business news, but after a short while, his body stiffened as he stared at his laptop screen. The screen still displayed his business news, but a chilling article had popped up beside it, detailing 2 deaths in Alley 13.
An elderly, gaunt man, found twisted on the ground, his eyes wide open and unblinking, in an abandoned house in Alley 13. The more terrifying detail was that 49 days later, an old woman, a scrap collector, had died in the exact same manner in the same abandoned house. The 2 deaths, 49 days apart, had sent shivers down the spine of the public and became a popular topic for supernatural news channels. Ethan read, an involuntary frown creasing his brow. A cold dread snaked its way up his spine, and his heart hammered. He slammed the laptop shut and walked to the window, taking a deep breath. It had started to rain, and a heavy feeling weighed on his soul.
A loud clap of thunder made Ethan jump. Sarah in the kitchen shrieked. Ethan's hands instinctively clasped together, an inexplicable sense of unease gripping him. Just then, a faint, distorted buzzing sound drifted down from the upstairs. He froze, his heart pounding. He looked around. Sarah was busy in the kitchen and Leo was nowhere to be seen. Ethan sighed, assuming his son must have run upstairs to play. He relaxed and turned back to his work. But then, a clear, high-pitched voice spoke from behind him, making him jump.
"Daddy, I want to watch cartoons." Leo stood there, fresh from the bathroom. Ethan's blood ran cold. If Leo's here, who turned on the TV upstairs? He slowly climbed the stairs, each step feeling weighted by an invisible force. In the master bedroom, the TV blared. On the screen, the news segment about Arthur and Sarah's deaths played, showing slow-motion replays of the bodies dragged across the floor, their vacant eyes staring out, holding a terrible secret. Ethan, trembling, grabbed the remote and switched off the TV. He spun around, desperate to escape.
But as he turned, the TV's sound returned, this time accompanied by a blood-curdling, mournful scream. The scream didn't stop. It echoed through the room, trying to pierce his very mind. Ethan was overcome by terror, panting, his head feeling like it would explode with the overlapping guttural laughter that followed. It wasn't until Sarah's voice called from downstairs that Ethan snapped back to reality. He looked. The TV was off. He exhaled, trying to calm himself, rationalizing it as exhaustion from the long drive.
During dinner, Ethan couldn't focus. His mind replayed the images of Alley 13 deaths, the strange events of the day. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He tried to dismiss it as coincidence, but the thoughts burrowed into his mind, causing a splitting headache. Suddenly, Sarah's sharp voice cut through his thoughts, making him jump. "Are you going to eat or what?" Sarah snapped at Leo, who was glued to his tablet, ignoring his food. Ethan looked at his wife, a sudden chill washing over him. Her face was contorted in a furious scowl. Sarah, usually gentle and soft-spoken, rarely raised her voice at their son. Ethan tried to calm her, to focus on eating, but his wife's shouts, familiar yet chillingly wrong, haunted him.
Leo, scolded by his mother, burst into ragged sobs. The crying began as whimpers, then escalated into a piercing wail that seemed to shred Ethan's sanity. He felt his body grow cold, a clammy sweat breaking out on his forehead. His wife's shouts and Leo's cries repeated in his ears, a relentless torture. He wanted to get up, to retreat to his room, but as he rose, Sarah sprang up too. She lunged at Leo, snatching the tablet from his hands and furiously smashing it to the floor. Leo screamed, terrified, as Sarah glowered at him, her eyes bloodshot, her fists clenched, ready to strike if he didn't obey. Ethan watched, frozen in absolute horror. He stared at his wife. Yet it wasn't her. Her eyes, her rage, those tightly clenched fists, everything about her suffocated him.
A memory, sharp and terrifying, flashed across his mind. He screamed, his body trembling, and bolted from the room, leaving his bewildered wife and wailing son behind. He slammed the bedroom door shut, sinking to the floor, covering his ears. But his wife's angry murmurs, his son's cries, still penetrated, pushing him to the brink. That night, sleep eluded Ethan. He tossed and turned, his mind a chaotic mess of nameless thoughts, especially the news report about the Alley 13 deaths. He frowned, trying to push the disturbing images away, but the more he tried, the deeper they seemed to engrave themselves into his mind.
The next day, Ethan drove Sarah and Leo back to their home in the city, his mood heavy and exhausted. Leo, as if sensing the unsettling atmosphere, remained unusually quiet. Sarah, however, seemed perpetually irritated. It was strange. This vacation was no different from their previous ones, yet this time she had been out of sorts since they arrived at the villa.
After their short, unsettling getaway, Ethan returned to work physically and mentally drained. He came home late, quickly cleaned up, had a quick dinner, and retreated to his private room. Around midnight, a strange sound drifted from outside his window. It wasn't the wind, nor an animal. It was a faint, distant whispering. Ethan tried to calm himself, dismissing it as exhaustion. It wasn't until nearly midnight that he finally drifted into a restless sleep. Suddenly, a piercing shriek ripped through the night. Ethan jolted awake, his eyes snapping open. His heart pounded wildly, his blood turning to ice. The shriek echoed from somewhere inside the house, accompanied by chaotic sounds and muffled sobs. He turned to ask Sarah what was happening, only to find her side of the bed empty.
Ethan sprang up, a wave of dread washing over him. He hurried out of the bedroom, down the long, dark hallway. The air felt thick, each step heavier than the last. He pushed open Leo's door. The room was empty, the small bed neatly made, as if no one had slept there. His throat tight, he called out for his wife and son, but only his own voice echoed back. The shouts and cries continued, leading Ethan down the long, winding hallway. With each step closer, the fear within him intensified. The old storage room door at the end of the hall came into view, a flickering light spilling from beneath it. Ethan froze at the threshold, his palms slick with sweat.
He hesitated for a few seconds before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The sight within made Ethan's blood run cold. His usually gentle wife stood in the center of the room, her eyes vacant. In her hand, a leather whip. Before her, Leo, tied tightly to an old wooden chair, his small body trembling, his skin covered in bruises, silent accusations. "What are you doing, Sarah?" Ethan roared, rushing towards her, but his wife didn't react. She turned her head, her empty eyes fixed on him, and then she smiled, a grotesque, unnatural smile. "I did good, didn't I?" she said, her voice cold and alien. "I did just as you taught me. You said to be strict with him, that children only learn through the rod. I've been a very good student, darling." Sarah cackled, then raised the whip again, her eyes fixed on her bewildered husband.
"I never told you such a thing. Stop it! Let him go!" Ethan screamed, but his feet felt glued to the floor. He struggled, but his body wouldn't obey. His wife continued to sneer, raising the whip high. "The final lesson is to finish the job," she shrieked, preparing to deliver a devastating blow to their small son. Ethan watched the horrifying scene, utterly desperate. "No!" he screamed. In that split second, Ethan, with a surge of impossible strength, lunged forward like a whirlwind, tackling his wife to the floor. The whip flew from her hand, clattering away. He quickly untied Leo, who sobbed uncontrollably, his small body shaking. Ethan pulled his son into a tight embrace, then turned to his wife.
"Are you insane, Sarah? What has he done to deserve this?" Sarah froze, her eyes empty as she looked at her husband and son. Then, as if a light had flickered on, she began to cry, soft, desperate sobs.
I don't know. I don't understand why I did that. Something controlled me."
Ethan held Leo tighter, the boy still sobbing, clinging to his father. He looked at his wife with a mix of utter disappointment and profound hurt. The room fell silent, save for Leo's quiet whimpers, but in Ethan's heart, a deeper terror was beginning to bloom. This wasn't a nightmare. This was a brutal, unbelievable reality.
"I'm here, son. You're safe," Ethan whispered, carrying Leo back to their bedroom. He laid him on the bed and soothed him back to sleep. Sarah, shaken, she'd sleep in the living room tonight to collect herself. Ethan sat numbly on the edge of the bed, stroking his son's head, his vacant eyes fixed on Sarah's dressing table mirror. The mirror reflected the faint glow of the lamp, but in that fleeting moment, a dark shadow seemed to flit across it, a cold gust of wind tracing a path up his spine. Ethan shuddered, trying to compose himself. His heart pounded erratically. But then, as if compelled by an unseen force, he stood up and followed the shadow. The narrow passage led him to Leo's room.
The door was slightly ajar, and the scene inside froze Ethan in his tracks. On the floor, a strange child sat playing with Leo's familiar toys. But this child wasn't human. Its skin was pallid, waxy, its eyes deep and unnervingly dark, and its mouth was twisted into a smile devoid of life. Its tattered clothes were covered in dirt, as if it had just emerged from the grave. The child turned its head, its black eyes fixing on Ethan. It held up a red toy car. It giggled, a chilling, childlike sound. "Uncle, did you buy this for me? You promised, remember? You said if I was good and didn't run away, you'd buy it for me."
Ethan gasped, unable to speak. Those words, a hazy memory from his distant past. He stumbled back a few steps, ready to bolt, but the child stood up, still clutching the toy car, and took small, deliberate steps towards him. Its voice echoed again, more haunting than before. "It's mine now, isn't it, Uncle? You said if I didn't cry, you'd buy it for me." Ethan screamed, lunging out of the room, running frantically as if to escape a nightmare. But from behind him, soft footsteps echoed, steady and relentless, dogging his every move. And that voice, it wouldn't stop, a curse carved into his very soul. "Uncle, don't forget your promise, Uncle." The voice suddenly went silent. Ethan stopped, cautiously turning around. The dark hallway was empty. He exhaled, sinking to the floor in utter terror, his eyes wide and vacant, staring into the cold night.
It had been over 5 years, but how could Ethan forget that young face, those innocent yet chilling words? He remembered his early days in the city, a young man brimming with ambition, but with nothing but empty pockets. The sprawling metropolis had swallowed him whole, each step a fresh wound to his pride.
Con artists and endless struggles had slowly eroded his money and his faith. The constant struggle for survival, the crushing despair had always lingered. Despite his strong education, the harsh reality of life had taught him that the world wasn't as easy as books made it seem. Succeeding here required more than just theories. That day, the enticing aroma of fried rice from a roadside diner made Ethan's stomach clench. Without thinking, he burst into the place, ordered a plate, and devoured it. But when he went to pay, he discovered his meager savings had mysteriously vanished.
Panicked, Ethan tried to explain to the owner, but the man was uninterested in his sob story. He only wanted his money. Ethan, desperate, pleaded, promising to borrow from friends and return to pay. But the owner, a gruff man, refused. He accused Ethan of trying to cheat him, then began to verbally abuse him, mocking his northern accent. Ethan, knowing he was in the wrong, tried to remain calm, but the more he endured, the more aggressive the owner became. He even scooped a spoonful of rice onto the floor, telling Ethan to eat it like a dog if he was truly hungry, and then he wouldn't demand payment. That was the breaking point.
Ethan lunged at the owner, beating him savagely until bystanders pulled them apart. It was then that Ethan truly became aware of what he had done. He looked up and saw a rugged-looking middle-aged man and a woman with sharp, cold eyes. They were Arthur Jenkins and Sarah. After they paid the diner owner for Ethan, the three of them went to another establishment for drinks. At first, Ethan was wary, but his gratitude and desperation overcame his caution. Their conversation quickly grew intimate. Arthur, with a knowing smile, asked, "You've got guts, kid. I like that. Want to work for me? I've got a job for you." Ethan looked at Arthur, astonished, then at Sarah, who simply offered a welcoming shrug. Drowning in uncertainty, Arthur's offer was a lifeline. Ethan agreed instantly, unaware that this decision would steer his life down an irreversible path. Ethan's job wasn't simple labor. He was taken deep into Alley 13, a dark, gloomy place where sunlight seemed never to touch. Here, Arthur and Sarah ran a human trafficking ring. At first, Ethan's job was to watch over the children they lured and held captive. They would cry and beg, but Ethan told himself he only needed to keep them from escaping. Everything else wasn't his concern. But things weren't that simple. The children, filled with desperation and fear, constantly tried to escape. At first, Ethan tried to coax them, promising toys or treats. Some obeyed, but others resisted, infuriating him. He'd yell at them, ordering them to be silent. One time, their crying disturbed his meal, and in a fit of rage, he threw his bowl of rice to the floor, shattering it. The children's desperate pleas infuriated Ethan even more, and he slowly lost control. Arthur and Sarah taught him a more effective method: force. They swore that no child's will was stronger than a whip. Ethan tried it, and it worked. From then on, the three of them took turns tormenting the children if they didn't obey. Horrifyingly, Ethan even devised new methods, tying them to chairs, using whips and other tools to torture them when they disobeyed. Their screams echoed through the alley, but for the three monsters, it was a perverse stimulant.
Time passed, and Ethan slowly lost all sense of guilt. His actions became routine. He convinced himself he had no other choice, but deep down, he knew he had become a monster. Alley 13 had drained his humanity, leaving behind a husk existing only in darkness. One day, as Ethan gripped a child's arm, his eyes red with anger, a weak cry mingled with the whistling wind outside the window, but Ethan didn't care. Suddenly, the door opened. Arthur and Sarah entered, leading another child. The new child was thin, pale. Arthur grinned, introducing him. "This is the new one, number 13. Ethan's expression shifted. He pushed the previous child aside and knelt before the new child, number 13, beginning his routine. First, the persuasion. "What do you like, kid? A toy car? I'll buy it if you're good." The child silently nodded, its dark, hollow eyes seeming to pull Ethan in. It held out a tiny finger, hooking it with his. "You promise, uncle." "No breaking promises." Ethan chuckled, but a chill ran through him as their fingers touched.
Number 13 was the most obedient of all the children, and the least beaten. With his consistent good behavior, Ethan even surpassed Arthur and Sarah, becoming an important link in the human trafficking chain. Though he never truly knew the boss behind it all, he'd overheard Arthur, in his drunken ramblings, hint at a powerful figure. He suggested there was a reason why, despite everyone in Alley 13 knowing their activities, no one dared to report them, and authorities never ventured there. Ethan seemed to understand then that their boss was likely a powerful, well-connected individual, clearing their path to operate freely. Reassured, Ethan threw himself into his work. By confining and tormenting the children, he amassed a substantial fortune. In just 1 year, he had accumulated a significant sum of money.
Then, disaster struck. Arthur and Sarah announced that their boss had been taken down, and the entire network was under investigation. They had to eliminate the remaining children and flee immediately. And so, in a single night, Ethan, Arthur, and Sarah personally dealt with the remaining children, including number 13. Then they left Alley 13, bringing their horrific work to an end. With his knowledge and the substantial capital he'd acquired, Ethan had no difficulty building a successful career. He married and had a child. Arthur and Sarah, however, were not so fortunate. They squandered all their ill-gotten gains on gambling. Arthur became a struggling taxi driver, and Sarah a scavenger, both living hand to mouth.
Years passed since Ethan escaped Alley 13, but the memories clung to him. The ghosts of Alley 13 were relentlessly pursuing him, and he knew that if he didn't resolve it, his life would be destroyed by the terrifying nightmares they inflicted. Finally, Ethan decided to return to Alley 13, where everything began. He was smart enough not to go alone. He sought out a spiritual medium, hoping to appease the lost souls there so they would no longer haunt him. As planned, on a dark night, they arrived at Alley 13. The alley was as before, dark and cold. The moss-covered walls seemed to bleed in the faint flickering light from the street lamp. The endless howls of dogs created a chilling symphony.
The medium, clutching an exquisitely carved wooden staff, calmly stepped into the alley, with Ethan following, his heart pounding with fear. They stopped before the abandoned house, the former prison of the trafficking ring. The medium began to set up offerings, lighting incense and scattering rice and salt around. He chanted incantations, his voice echoing in the silent space. Ethan stood beside him, trying to suppress the tremors in his body, but as the incense smoke spread, he began to feel everything around him grow hazy. Suddenly, an icy gust of wind swept through. Ethan looked around, a feeling both familiar and strange washing over him. He felt as though he had been pulled into another world.
He was no longer standing on the moss-covered ground. He was tied tightly to an old wooden chair, the ropes biting into his flesh, the pain so intense he wanted to scream. Before him stood the children he had once tormented, forming a circle around him. They looked at him with cold, empty eyes, no longer the weak, helpless children they once were. "Please, no, I beg you," Ethan sobbed, pleading. But the children paid him no mind. One of them picked up a whip and brought it down on his back. The loud cracks of the whip mingled with their eerie, cackling laughter.
Ethan screamed in agony, each lash burning his skin. With each descending blow, memories of his past actions flooded back, like knives plunging into his mind. In that moment of ultimate pain, Ethan realized what was happening. It was exactly like the past, only the roles were reversed. Ethan was now experiencing the bone-deep suffering of those children, feeling their helplessness and despair as their feeble pleas were dismissed by monsters like him. He felt the true punishment, not from the spirit's lashes, but from the utter revulsion of himself. Suddenly, from the crowd of children, a mournful wail erupted. Child number 13 stepped forward. It stared intensely at Ethan, tears streaming down its grotesque face. Its mouth, twisted and misshapen, curled into a demonic sneer. "You broke your promise, Uncle. Now you have to pay."
At that moment, the medium seemed to sense a profound shift. The incense smoke turned pitch black, twisting into monstrous shapes. A deep thrum echoed from within the abandoned house, startling him. "This isn't good," he muttered, turning to Ethan, but he had already slumped to the ground, unconscious. The cold wind grew stronger, and hateful whispers began to fill the air. The medium, his eyes wide with panic, his voice trembling, knew he was out of options. He quickly gathered his belongings and fled the alley, never looking back, even as the sounds of weeping and demonic laughter pursued him.
Ethan was left alone in his waking nightmare. The children continued to torment him, scratching and hitting him without mercy. Ethan writhed, tears streaming down his face. "I was wrong. Please, stop. I'm sorry." His apologies were met only with mocking laughter. Then Ethan suddenly awoke, his eyes vacant. Whispering voices in his ears seemed to lead him on. He instinctively pulled out a lighter and flicked it open. A searing pain erupted in his chest. Everything around Ethan burst into flames. Red, ravenous flames consumed everything, and the entire abandoned house went up in a ferocious blaze.
The fire roared so intensely that the surrounding residents rushed out in alarm, but no one dared to approach. The fire illuminated a whole section of the sky, like a horrifying sacrificial ritual. When the flames were finally extinguished, Ethan's charred body was found in the center of the ruined, abandoned house. But what truly horrified everyone were the incense bowls. Despite the fire having devoured everything else, the bowls remained intact, untouched. They were arranged in a perfect circle, and upon counting, there were exactly 13 of them.
Rumors spread rapidly. The stories didn't end there. A week later, some curious individuals ventured into Alley 13 to examine the scene. The abandoned house still in ruins, and the air around it felt even colder. People claimed that every night the cries of children and the screams of both men and women still echoed ceaselessly from that place. Some even swore they saw the shadowy figures of Ethan, Arthur Jenkins, and Sarah, their faces contorted in agony, standing silently in the darkness, staring towards the road leading out of the alley. Alley 13 was then abandoned completely. No one dared to approach it. Every night, those passing by would hear the ghostly sounds, and the rumors multiplied. They said this was a place where tormented souls could never find peace, forever trapped, and the three of them, the cursed souls, would endure endless torment in the very hell they had created for others. Their suffering was a perpetual warning,
a chilling reminder of the choices they made. And so, the cursed Alley 13 became a place of both dread and a twisted form of justice. For years, the screams and cries continued, a chilling symphony heard only by those brave enough, or unfortunate enough, to linger near its cursed mouth.
It was a place where the echoes of the past served as an eternal penance, a never-ending cycle of atonement for the horrors committed within its shadowed confines. For Ethan, Arthur, and Sarah, their torment was the haunting itself, a grim reflection of their cruelty. But in a strange, chilling way, it brought a sense of balance. The spirits of the innocent children found their peace not through their tormentors' demise, but through their eternal suffering, ensuring that no more would ever be lost to the dark embrace of Alley 13.